So I'm Richard Taylor, and I do various bits of things with mySociety. I've been a volunteer on the Freedom of Information website, What Do They Know, for quite a few years now, and I'm also paid to do some work on TheyWorkForYou, the parliamentary monitoring site. Something that mySociety does is it produces websites, services, which from the point of view of somebody using them look very simple. This is Fix My Street, and this is mySociety's problem reporting tool. And this is a page you get if you type in Cambridge as your location, and you get offered the opportunity to click the map to say where there's a problem, something like a street light out, cracked bit of pavement or something, and you can then report the problem, and the website then gets it to the right person. Now, although what this website does, it looks simple from the point of view of the user, there's an awful lot of complexity behind it, and that's the same with many of mySociety's websites. So, an example of the complexity behind this site, the map that you're shown depends on where you are in the country. If you search for somewhere in London where there's a high population density, you'll get a very zoomed in map. Search for something out in the middle of the countryside, you'll get a map which is zoomed out to make it more likely that you'll be able to find where to put your pin in the next stage. So it's something that's been iterated over many years to affect the user experience. There's also an awful lot of data behind this, because you've got to be able to direct the report to the right place, even in a country like ours, where in some places there are 3 levels of local government, and you've got to pick the right one for the right kind of issue. What Do They Know? Our website for making freedom of information requests in public. Again, it looks very simple and straightforward. All it does is it makes a email correspondence thread public, but behind the scenes of that one, again, we've got a large number of people working every day. We've got volunteers working on the site to do things like respond to requests from public bodies to take material down when they've accidentally released something they shouldn't have done, or when they've released something and instead of redacting information, they just highlighted it in black. And we've got to take that down, or consider taking it down, because we always decide what to do once after we've got the request in. And we also have to maintain a large database of public bodies. We've got 15,000 public bodies on the website, so we've got to adapt when the public bodies change, merge, become defunct, and we've got to just keep up to date with their contact details as well. So all these sites, they're not things that sort of just get built and left to run. They all have continuous work going on them, and they cost money, and they take people's time to keep them going. TheyWorkForYou, the website that I'm going to talk about today, is no exception to that. So it was started by volunteers just before mySociety itself was started, just over 10 years ago, and then mySociety has taken it on. And really one of the great things that mySociety has done with these sites is actually it's provided an institution behind them that's enabled them to keep running. So like TheyWorkForYou, what it does is it takes information which is provided by Parliament in a not particularly easy to use form, and makes it prettier, and actually enables you to do more stuff with it. So on TheyWorkForYou, you can click on an MP's name, you can get through to write to them, and you can write to an MP, you can set up alerts, so you can track what either an MP is doing, or you can set up an alert on a keyword to track a subject when it is raised in Parliament. Those are things you can't do with the parliamentary Hansard. You also can't scribble in the margins of the official parliamentary Hansard on their site. You can on TheyWorkForYou. We have an annotations feature, so you can make your own note, or you can help other people by linking perhaps to a document that's mentioned in a speech. And something that did come as a bit of a surprise to me when I sort of got inside mySociety is that this doesn't all happen automatically. The scraper that takes the information from Parliament doesn't work constantly, and it actually needs sort of mySociety's highly paid, highly skilled developers to. There's always one of them on duty with a responsibility to check if the Parliament has been properly scraped, has properly gone into TheyWorkForYou on a daily basis for every day that the Parliament sits. Now, if you ask people what the important things are that MPs do, MPs do all sorts of things: open supermarkets, run campaigns, make speeches. But from my point of view, the most important thing that MPs do is definitely vote in Parliament. That's ultimately where they are using the power that we give them when we elect an MP, and we give the power goes from us to the MP, and the MP on our behalf votes on the key decisions about how our country is going to be run. This is an unusual view of the House of Commons, not a view you normally see. It's not just a corridor, it's one of the division lobbies that run either side of the House of Commons chamber. So when there's a disagreement amongst MPs, they physically divide, and then they leave the chamber from one side or the other and go into these division lobbies. And apparently if you're a real parliamentary geek, you can actually work out which way they're going to vote by which doors they use to leave the chamber. But I'm not quite at that level yet. Then they leave the chamber past the clerks, who are just notice me that I can't see anything on that picture, but past the clerks and past tellers from either side, and then the tellers report the overall results of the vote back to Parliament, and the clerks produce a list. Quite what happens to that list, I'm not entirely sure, but eventually about 3 or 4 hours later it ends up being published in the first draft of Hansard. Sometimes I think big news organisations appear to get an advanced copy, and I've been trying to work out exactly sort of how they get that and what the process is for getting kind of how the BBC finds out who the rebels are on an important vote. Very something that I've been looking into. So this is my MP's page, Jim Hubbard, and this is MP here in Cambridge, presumably many of your MP as well. Now the reason I mention that is because it's really important that everything mySociety does is impartial, so I'm not promoting a particular MP, it just happens to be the MP for this area, and my MP. And the thing that I work on, particularly on TheyWorkForYou, are the statements that we write on each MP's page about how they've voted. Now these are one of the most popular elements of TheyWorkForYou, and they're one of the things that we see sort of people referring to. People refer to them on social media. We see people questioning their MP on the back of what we show on our site. And what we try and do is distill down some things that are really quite complicated, and very difficult, time-consuming to work out and follow for yourself, and put it into some nice, simple, short sentences. Things like our MP, Julian Hubbard, has voted strongly for equal gay rights. And some of these sentences are based on over 100 votes. We've got a sentence where we say whether each MP has voted for greater integration with the European Union or not, and that one's based on over 100 votes. And something like smoking ban for Julian Hubbard, that's about, I think, 3 votes since he's been in Parliament. For other MPs, that's a few more votes, they've been in Parliament for longer. I said it's really important to us that we are impartial and non-partisan. So one of the things we had to think about when we were doing this is how do we even decide which topics to cover? Because we could be accused of being partisan just by what we decide to draw attention to. So what we decided to do was we decided to follow what MPs themselves are particularly interested in. There are about 650 MPs in Parliament. They don't all turn up to every vote by any means. Some votes are much better attended than others. So we can use MPs' own attendance in votes as a way of giving them some kind of mention of ranking of importance. And when we tried to do that, and when we got our list of important votes, we found that there was someone missing. And some things that we could see were getting a lot of press attention, and we thought were of public interest and we should be covering. Didn't come up in that because sometimes on important votes a whole party will abstain. So we had to come up, nothing's ever simple, we had to come up with a slightly more convoluted way of doing things and come up with some kind of way of correcting for whole party abstentions. So I think that's just one element of this where we try really hard to have a systematic way of doing things, so that if we are accused or if someone challenges us about what we've put on these pages, we have a very defensible way of saying how we've come to make these statements. So an element of what I do is from traditional sort of journalism and research, in terms of I've got to research what happens in individual votes, but a lot of it is we're applying the systems that we've defensible systems that we've developed in order to come up with these kind of statements. So with every vote we give a score, and then we say how many. So if an MP had always voted with policy on every vote that was related to it, they'd have 100% say they voted very strongly for it. If they hadn't, be on the other side. And we even go to the level of not treating all votes equally. Some votes we consider as strong votes, so something like if it was on the policy on increasing VAT, if you've actually increased the main rate of VAT from 17.5% to 20%, if you voted for that, that's a strong vote. If you voted just for something to come into the coverage of VAT and for VAT to apply to it, that would be a weak vote for extending VAT. So, something else we have to be very careful of is our language. Every single sentence that we've got here has been discussed internally. The director of mySociety, Tom Steinberg, acts as essentially my editor if I'm the journalist, and he has to. We discuss everything before it goes on the site. The top one here is something that caused quite some discussion. So this is a vote on what has been popularly called the bedroom tax, the benefits penalty for social housing tenants who are deemed to have excess bedrooms. And the problem that we face here is just using the label bedroom tax, because bedroom tax is a label that the opposition has put on a government policy. So even mentioning that phrase can and does result in people questioning why are we using that when it is just by using that phrase we could be seen to be part of that. But in this case we have decided to have some balance in terms of helping our users understand what's going on. So we both presented technical defensible description and added in that the Labour Party call it the bedroom tax, just to help users. And we have been thinking about how we can present this kind of information more simply without losing the sort of rigorous impartiality that we've got. So we've thought about doing a kind of tabloid style version of these things, where we perhaps just say whether people have voted for the bedroom tax or against, for the EU or against, and just pick out 4 or 5 different things. But if we did that, we'd kind of make it really clear that I kind of put a red top on it and big caveats to say what we were doing and to urge people to look at the details if they want them. Now, everything we do is referenced, so if people want to get down and drill down and find out what's behind these things, they can click on source links and they'll find out the list of votes, they'll see a calculation of the score, and ultimately you can click through and you'll get back to Parliament's the original Hansard which these things are based on. So this is we use another site called Public Whip to do the descriptions of individual votes, and that contains a lot of kind of the back end of the calculations which are used to display these short sentences on TheyWorkForYou. So what I've been doing is I've actually gone through every vote, all 1,200 of them since the last general election, and I've described them in plain English terms. So this one's quite a straightforward one because it's just an MP calling on the government to do something in this motion. So it's quite easy to pull out what that means in a single sentence here. But I've done that for every vote, and it's quite a satisfying thing to do because I can write 2 sentences. I can write a sentence for what it means if an MP has voted aye, and what it means if an MP has voted no. And I don't know if those count as data-driven journalism, but it's sort of programmatically supported journalism, because then the computer can then it knows which way each MP has voted, so it can put the appropriate sentence on each MP's page for the vote. So I do a little bit of journalism, a little bit of research, and then that can help people interpret a lot of the data which has been programmatically extracted from the Parliament's website. So this is an example of what you get from Parliament. Parliament rendering of Hansard. This is them recording the vote. So, but what you get is just a list of MPs. So one thing that we do programmatically is extract those lists and match them up with names of MPs. So Parliament just gives you the total sort of final score of the vote. Programmatically, if we know which MP belongs to which party, we can do some more breakdowns of that kind of thing. But you also have to interpret what has happened in the vote. So in this vote, MPs are voting on if they should make Amendment A to Lord's Amendment 9. And often there's that kind of level of kind of complexity in the way a vote is phrased. So then that's why you've got to then do research. You've got to go and look at what the amendment is, so the amendment in this case, what it would have been originally, what the effect of that would have been. And often MPs do vote on quite obscure things, like deleting lines 20 to 25 of page something of a bill. So that's why it takes some research effort and to find out exactly what's going on. have been some efforts to improve things. There's been a motion in Parliament in a session to require MPs who propose an amendment to explain their amendment. But that didn't pass. Only 23 MPs actually voted for it. And you can see not many MPs even turned up for that vote, which is actually fairly usual. Now, so at the moment, the MPs have an opportunity to explain their amendments. And of course, when they do that, that can be very useful for me, but it doesn't happen very often. So when they do, I can just say, the MPs described it like this. But of course, I still have to check that they've been describing it honestly to their fellow MPs, because of course they're encouraging them to vote for it. So this is showing something that I do with every vote in Parliament. I tweet about it. And this is another vote where this is typically the style that I'll tweet about a vote. I'll say that my MP, Julie Huppert, has voted, in this case, to ban letting agents charging tenants, prospective tenants fees, and I'll link to the division description. So this is a way that I make my MP, Julie Huppert, work for me, because it's useful to have someone checking my work. And if I see that Julie Huppert has retweeted me when I've tweeted a tweet like this, I take it as some confirmation that I've actually got the vote the right way around and I've described it properly.
Has he ever challenged you?
He asked. I've sometimes got the day. Actually, yesterday I got the day that the vote took place wrong, and he has on occasion he's actually written back to explain a vote, which is quite useful. But again, I think that's a positive thing. He hasn't written back to say you've got it wrong. He's just written back to explain why he's done what he's done. So I get Julie Huppert to work for me, checking the work that I'm paid to do for mySociety. So one thing that I get to do that I really enjoy doing for mySociety is I get to answer some of their emails. I get to answer some of the emails on what they know when people have done things like highlighting in black, and they're fun ones to deal with. We get some fun emails on TheyWorkForYou as well. We've had a fair number of MPs while the site's been running being just upset by the fact that we exist, by the fact that we make their voting record more easily accessible. Something we do that perhaps surprises them is that we take account of all votes, not just the ones that they might feel important. So if an MP just raises a motion, if it's an opposition day motion or something on something, we will take that into account in our calculations. And they might be surprised by that, or they might be surprised that we've actually been tracking them now since 2001. So some MPs just complain that we exist. Another quite kind of complaint that we get from MPs is they say we've looked at, or parliamentarians in general, because we cover Lords as well, but they'll say, well, we've looked at I've looked at my page on TheyWorkForYou, and it's not fair because it doesn't reflect what I think. And then I get to write a fantastic email back to them and say, no, it's not meant to reflect what you think, it reflects how you voted. And then, of course, we invite them to get in touch if they've got any problems or if we've done anything wrong. But usually then they just don't come back. So this is an example when Jimmy Huppert writes back to me and he explains why he's voted as he has. So he doesn't want the Office of Budget Responsibility to work on checking the sums in party political manifestos, because he thinks that, presumably he thinks, that getting involved in party politics would damage the reputation of the Office of Budget Responsibility, so he's quite happy for them not to do that. So it's something that we might like to add to TheyWorkForYou in the future, actually quite a useful feature, if we could allow MPs to explain their votes. We have to find out some function for doing that, either MPs themselves or perhaps people picking up the appropriate snippet from the debate or an appropriate snippet from a newspaper of MPs explaining why they've done what they've done. Sometimes there are good reasons for MPs voting against the way that they say they will do all their manifestos, particularly when it comes to, say, something like a budget. Because when it comes to a budget is a very big thing. You have to take a view on the whole thing, and there might be things in it that you don't support, but you're going to vote for it anyway because you like the whole package. But what's really great is to see on social media people actually putting those kind of questions to them. Why do you support the budget when it's got this in it? And then, of course, the MP can explain the kind of politics that are involved and how they've come to their decision. One thing that's this is a mock-up of how some of the policy pages on TheyWorkForYou might look in the future. And something that's quite good about mySociety at the moment. It's a growing organisation. It's got a bit of money, which means it's got some designers, so there's been some work going into TheyWorkForYou. But a lot of mySociety's money now is focused on work overseas. It's focused on things like getting what do they know, like sites to work in other countries and to get other countries to establish sites like TheyWorkForYou. If our director Tom Steinberg was here, he'd probably tell us that it's tenfold or more easier to get money to have a parliamentary monitoring site in a country which is perceived to have a weak democracy or has a weak democracy than it is to run something in the UK. So essentially the UK sites TheyWorkForYou are almost running without any funding. But some people do make some donations to us, but they're running at the moment just supporting the work that's done in other countries just by running as an example of what can be done. So, but TheyWorkForYou is under active development. Things are being improved. So this is how a policy page will look for a particular MP, hopefully very soon on mobile. Just because our designers start mobile first, because they're current and up to date and doing what is up to date and trendy. And it will then go down, hopefully, with the individual votes that contributed to us coming up with the sentence describing the overall view and the overall way an MP has voted on a subject. And we're also hoping to pull in their speeches if we can. And if they haven't said anything, because often MPs don't speak on a particular subject, they leave it up to their party spokespeople or up to their leaders. So we'll pull in a speech from one of their colleagues if we had to, or maybe a tweet. That's just a slide to say that we've been doing some experiments on the way that we display this. We've got an awful lot of data in public whip that we're not displaying on TheyWorkForYou on a nice, easy to read manner at the moment, but we could do very soon. What we haven't been showing particularly, that's an example of how we could break down how within a party on a particular subject how different MPs have voted. This is one way of showing Dewey Hubbart's how he's voted on the 3 times he's had a chance to vote on smoking ban. So he's voted not to allow smoking in pubs and private clubs which don't serve food. So he wanted to maintain the ban there. Then he missed a vote, and then he did vote on one of the votes where MPs decided to ban smoking in cars with children present. So one thing you'd probably like to see is that we do, everything that I do is available under an open license, so as long as you attribute where it's come from, you can use it and do what you like with it, and hopefully people will do stuff with it as we run into the election. As I said, mySociety really doesn't have a particular focus or a lot of money to spend on its UK sites, but we have the data, we have the voting records. So this will be the first time that we're going into a general election in this country where the sitting MPs' voting records are comprehensively, easily accessible to the electorate, which is the great thing that mySociety's managed to achieve. But hopefully people will do stuff like has happened in previous elections where we could ask some of the candidates what their views are on these subjects that we cover, and that might enable someone to produce a election quiz where you ask what are your views, and then it might tell you who you should vote for if you're looking to vote for someone whose views match yours on the policy questions. Something else we might like to do in the future, like I've been looking to see what what happens in other countries where similar sites are run. And this is the site from America, which follows what some of their elected representatives are doing. And what they let you do on this site is they let users who are logged in as a constituent of this lady, you can say what your view is on a particular bill or a particular vote. Now, this is something we've decided not to do on TheyWorkForYou. We've decided not to let our users say which constituency they're from and click to say whether they agree or disagree with a particular policy statement, because we're really concerned about our accuracy and our reputation, and we're just concerned that we wouldn't be able to do it in a reliable manner that would actually produce meaningful data, because just as I've signed into this site pretending that I'm from wherever this person represents, someone could do that and game our system. So we have been looking though into polling and doing it properly, but opinion polls are incredibly expensive. They're far too expensive to do even as well outside the scope of crowdsourcing. One thing that is quite interesting is Google. You pay Google to a few pence and you can get some clicks through to your website. And that's actually one way that our site is supported. Actually, we get some free Google adverts because Google supports charities and sites doing what we're doing. But you can actually get Google to ask people questions as well, and you can pay for a click on an answer to a question. So we might be able to ask everyone in the country whether they want to see an elected House of Lords and display the how MPs have voted against what the country thinks. Something that would be really interesting and exciting to do is if on the morning following the election, when we've got the election results, if someone's managed to put questions on these topics to a significant number of candidates, we could actually on election morning say how the old Parliament differs from the new. So is the new Parliament more pro-integration with the European Union or not? And that might be quite an interesting thing to be able to say straight away after an election. Actually, doing this job, mySociety has actually given me something that I'm sure many people don't have. I've actually got a favourite vote, and this is my favourite vote. This is a vote by Ed Balls, who's the Shadow Chancellor, and on 25th of March 2013 he voted against levying an income tax for 2013-14. And I have absolutely no idea why he did this. It hasn't been explained. Lots of his fellow Labour MPs followed him through the lobbies. I can only guess, perhaps he's primed to vote against the government, and he voted against the government in this vote. This is an interesting vote because income tax is something which Parliament has to somehow make sure happens every year. There has to be a motion usually like this that says income tax will be levied during the next tax year. That's because income tax in this country is it's an annual tax. It's an emergency measure which has been kept going since we've been fighting France in the early 1800s. So it's an emergency measure so we could fund the wars, and the emergency measure is kept being put through Parliament every year. So if Ed Balls had his way, we'd have had another £150 billion more on our deficit. But MP votes, often obscure votes like this, are usually missed by sort of mainstream media. It doesn't matter. Ed Balls is able to get away with inexplicable votes like this without people holding it into account. So hopefully our website and describing these votes, perhaps we'll get a change in the way things happen, and perhaps MPs will think a bit more about how they are voting. Done. Time? Okay? Or
you're a bit over. 2 minutes. Well, yeah. no, you've got until 8. it's plenty.
One quick last thing then. This is the public. It's a press gallery in the House of Parliament above the Speaker's chair. I don't work from there. In fact, to do what I do, all I need is access to the Parliament website and TheyWorkForYou for the speeches. But it would be quite interesting to go up and see what I could see if I could observe Parliament from the press gallery. But they're not that open. They only accredit certain people to go up there. I think there's about 400 people who are accredited to watch Parliament from the press gallery. And I think one of the reasons that they are so keen on controlling access to the press gallery, perhaps, is that you don't just get access to watch Parliament if you're up in the press gallery. You get access to one of the most exclusive bars in London, Moncrief's Bar, which just up until just a few years ago was only accessible to members of the press with accredited access to the press gallery. Although now it's accessible to anyone with a parliamentary pass. And they've also just refurbished up there, got office space and facilities to support press reporting. I've actually got in touch with them, and I've been asking what are the rules for getting up into the press gallery, and they've responded with things like, well, you've got to be a professionally qualified journalist, which is a nonsense really in this country, because I'm quite glad that we live in a country where you can just be a journalist. It's not a state-regulated profession. I don't need a licence to be a journalist. I can just do the job. And they've asked me, well, why do you want access, and what is it that you want to go and report? Well, I'd be a pretty rubbish journalist if I was going to tell them exactly what I wanted to go and see, but one of the things would be, for example, to go and look at how the established media organisations get the results of the vote more rapidly than I seem to be able to, just as a member of the public watching what comes out of Hansard. I'd also like to see some of the things that the cameras don't see. MPs are very, very tightly control what people see about how they work. For example, every day in Parliament starts with MPs praying. You never see that, it's never slipped out once. The camera is always focused on that clock until the prayer is over, it zooms out from the clock. And I'd just like to see how many MPs actually do pray in Parliament and see if it's actually something we should keep doing. It can be important because if you want to speak in a debate, it helps. I think you've got to have a seat, although you can sit in the galleries on either side, but you've got to have a seat somewhere. You're never called to speak if you're just standing up around the sides. So at a busy Prime Minister's questions, sometimes our MP is disenfranchised by the furniture if he's not managed to get a seat in time. And one way to get a seat in Parliament is to turn up to prayer, and then you can take your seat and you can keep that seat for the rest of the day. The thing that I'll finish on, again on the subject of MPs controlling how people monitor what they're doing. This is the scene outside the Select Committee where Rupert Murdoch got a pie in his face after someone jumped out in the public gallery and spattered him with the pie. Now, the people who took this footage, they lost their parliamentary passes, and their organisations had to apologise profusely for basically reporting the news, because Parliament doesn't allow people to take photographs or video unless you're in particular points which are just for interviews, and you have to be an established broadcasting organisation even to be able to apply for that kind of access. So they were very upset when some journalists did their jobs, as I'm glad they did. I think they did the right thing and simply reported the news to us. So I think I'll leave it there.
There's 5 minutes time for questions if anyone has any questions.
Okay. I can take any questions or anything that we've not covered. Or...
Have you been in the House of Commons?
I went into the House of Commons when I think I was about 10 or 11,
right.
And I saw Prime Minister's questions with Margaret Thatcher. And something that happened actually while I was there, I was in the public gallery, and someone sitting next to me took out a pen to take notes, and one of the ushers came down and confiscated the pen, because you weren't allowed to hold anything in your hands while watching Prime Minister's questions. So I saw someone trying to perhaps report or record what was going on then, and saw how the parliamentary authorities went.
The reason for the question, I was there about 2 weeks ago on a trip arranged by the local village historical society through the local MP, South Cambridge in this case. So if you talk nicely to Julian, you could get a tour of the Palace of Westminster. And the House of Commons is very small. It's not much bigger than this room. It's amazingly small. And the doors, you either go out the back and then round to the 2 lobbies. So the 2 lobbies are the rooms on either side. A's to the left, No's to the right, or whichever way around it is. So it's not secret voting at all. You know, most people. So there's a door at the end where you could be sort of secret and go out and then turn left or right. But there's also a door about 2/3 of the way down the side, which is bigger. And so most MPs, if they're voting yes, will just exit the main room through that door. So it's clear how they're going to vote. They have no chance. If they're going through that door, they can't vote no.
Yeah, the votes aren't secretive, like they're all published.
Yes,
it's just about interpreting them. Because
Well, presumably that's how the people who are there know what the result is before it's...
I mean, so just on the cameras, you can generally see which MPs have gone out through the door there or the door there, so they know who's voted which way.
So Julian's very active on Twitter, and often I get answers to things immediately on Twitter, whereas when I use Write to Them, it often takes 2 weeks or something like that. Do you see? First of all, I imagine that you would be interested in, but you'll probably refrain from using Twitter as a way of picking up MPs' views on things. But do you see it as something which is coming in?
I don't see why we couldn't use Twitter. So if we had a mechanism for MPs explaining their votes, I'd have thought Twitter would be right up there in the way that we get MPs to easily submit some information to our website. I think it'd be much harder to get an MP to become a user of our website than it would be just for them to tweet in an appropriate way, or just tweet their view and get our users to identify that tweet as being something we should stick on the site.
Are most MPs verified Twitter users, the little tick things? Ed Miliband had the little verified tick.
I've got no idea how Twitter decide who to give their ticks away to, but I think it's going to relate to how many followers you've got. So I noticed that Minister Norman Baker, who resigned yesterday, I was looking for his Twitter feed to cite him, and I found the real thing, but it didn't have a blue tick, so I had to really check that it was the right, it really was him. So I think you've got to have a large number of followers, probably. But I was surprised to see a British minister without that blue verified tick. Okay.
How do you think these websites have changed behaviour?
Well, I think MPs have had to get a little bit more accepting that they exist. I think, actually, when TheyWorkForYou started, Parliament was actually quite responsive. So TheyWorkForYou started, I think, by breaching parliamentary copyright, but very quickly they responded, and actually now it is run under a licence. So I think we can kind of lead things, like elected representatives are always sceptical when new things come in. Like I know there's campaigning locally about filming local council meetings. There's a lot of opposition when you first try and do something, but then eventually people can see it works, can see it's helpful, can see the public find it useful, and then they have to accept it. So
I think one way we can tell is that we get complaints from MPs saying that we think that their opinion is one thing and that they think it's a different one. So we can tell that the MPs are watching what's said here, and that therefore they think it's important. And I think we had a suggestion a while back that MPs had actually been giving more speeches so that they could appear.
Yes, that was when there was the metric on the site which said this MP has spoken at such and such times in debates, and they would make more interjections in other people's speeches simply to get that number up and go up in their MPs. But now there are no absolute numbers.
yeah, we are quite careful about what statistics we publish, because we don't want to encourage the wrong thing. So on Public Whip used to rank MPs by their attendance at votes, but we didn't want to do that anymore, because we didn't want to encourage MPs to vote on things they hadn't thought about. We thought actually it might be a good thing to have a thoughtful MP who just goes and participates in smaller number of votes but really knows what they're doing, and that might be okay. So the people who run Public Web actually took those columns and those options to sort out. Although they're actually things that are quite commonly requested by the press, because we don't make them easily publicly accessible now. But people who are doing stories on expenses, or particularly on Lord's expenses, how many days have they turned up to, they quite like that figure of how much money they're taking, and they're one of the people who sort of don't turn up very often.
It amazes me how many people expect MPs to sit in the chamber 24/7. They've got plenty of other things to do, you know.
Well, some MPs are parliamentarians and some aren't. So some, and Julian Hobbit is an example. It actually is quite a challenge for him to balance his campaigning work with the requirements to turn up and vote in Parliament. He actually missed one quite important vote. I think it was on the NHS risk register, so the potential impact of what might change if NHS reforms went through. And he missed that vote because he went out to meet a cycling delegation which had come to particularly meet him. And he was quite open about sort of the dilemma he faced. These people have made a great effort, lots of them have come to Parliament, come to meet me. He decided to go out to meet them rather than vote in Parliament. I would probably say he should have voted in Parliament. He took a different decision, he went out to meet his constituents. But people have lots of different expectations.
It's faintly ridiculous that he doesn't have something like a postal vote, really, isn't it?
But you might say it's one of the great positives of our system, that actually we can see it. It's not like having people just pressing buttons as we have in other legislatures. You actually see that they're there in person. They've got to be there. They've got to walk through the lobbies. There are pros and cons.
But for those who might have paired in with someone, they pair off MPs who they know can't be present to vote against someone who would have voted the opposite way.
So that's the kind of thing which MPs often think we should reflect. We should reflect these arrangements that take place between the whips to agree that two MPs won't vote, so that cancels each other out. But of course we've got no way of knowing, because they don't publish that. And they don't even publish the party whip. So sometimes we'll get told off for calling an MP a rebel in a vote, and they'll write to us and say, no, I wasn't a rebel, it was a free vote. But we have to make the statements that we make on the basis of the information we have. So when we say an MP has rebelled, we just mean that they voted against the majority of other MPs in their party. But maybe if the whip was available and was public, someone could build a website which reflects that. we have to operate as we do, almost blind of political parties existing. Well, certainly blind of the whip existing, because from our point of view, it really doesn't. Right. So I'll leave it there.
Cool.
Thank you.